afternoon. Thank you, Shervin. So now, actually, Shervin, you might as well come back. So Shervin and Paul are going to come back on stage, and also Ludo Feely from 1920 and Grant Miller from Ingenuity Engine. If you can welcome them on stage, we'll do the panel discussion. So, thank you for joining us, guys. The first question I want to ask is, how important is technology now in the creative process? How integral is it to kind of modern day advertising or filmmaking these days?
I mean, it's really become quite crucial. You know, technology and its advancement in the last few years really has just allowed us to do so much more with so much less. I mean, it used to take kind of a team of artists to accomplish now the work that a single person can really achieve in a day. And I think for creativity, really too, it's about the iteration that you can get in. You know, it's making 5 or 10 rounds of revisions with the client sitting right there instead of waiting a day. You know, you can really get a lot more done, and it's really empowering to, I think, the creative side as well.
Ludo, would you agree with that?
Yeah, it certainly allows you to do a lot more. You know, the advancement in technology. I think that every so often, I think software takes a bit of a step forward, a leap forward. Back in the day when I started, you couldn't even track an image. You had to do all that stuff by hand, and your results were questionable, to say the best, really. And then suddenly a piece of software comes out that allows you to track an image, and I think that today it moves on even further. And if we take that analogy into today, I think something like being able to track a camera is the next step, and that then suddenly allows you to do a whole lot more. So there are sort of fundamental things that happen at various times, and they definitely allow you to do. They allow you to do a lot more, but I think they also allow your results to be that much better. And we have a very sort of savvy audience, I think, watching what we do, and therefore the standard is extremely high, and you need that.
It's higher every time.
It is, and you just need that technology to help you fool everybody.
Yeah. And is that technology pushing continually? I mean, in the last however many years, it comes on leaps and bounds, and what we think at the time is brilliant kind of gets better and better. Is that still an upward curve, or will we hit a plateau of, well, this is as good as it gets, or this is pretty much as close to it? Is it until we hit essentially it looks like real life? It will continue to evolve.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, we're operating under Moore's law as far as processing power, so that's getting better in the algorithms, like that Monte Carlo unbiased rendering. But I think when it's democratized filmmaking to a very large degree, and it's made it easier. It's also made, I think it's also made it sort of worse. There's more bad effects out there, and so I think it has to be treated with caution, because just because I mean, it's like music. When anybody could write a sort of a track on their Mac, there was a lot of bad techno for a long time. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have really good results. I think the thing we see is that still the artistry and the craft is the important thing. But the great thing is that somebody with that artistry and craft doesn't need to sort of have some sort of like a friend of the family who have an in at a post-production company who can then sort of go running or serve tea for 6 months. They can just they can just get a license for themselves. There's lots of learning editions from different software, and they can go and make a film. So I think it's fantastic, but it's a double-edged sword, really.
Still need runners, Paul.
Can't do that, right?
Sure, you had that because you made that film. Obviously, you worked at post-production company, but you.
Yeah, I think what I notice happening is that you with the faster processors and the quicker computers, the times are, I know when I work on a film, it's still a 6-month deadline. It's still a crazy amount of shots, but with the advent of this new technology, it's just more stuff in the frame. To your point, the films are just being so filled with effects work that sometimes the storytelling is getting lost, and they're just more robots, more dinosaurs, more explosions.
All in the same movie.
All in the same movie. Yeah.
Well, that's to your point of, I suppose, just just because you can doesn't mean you should, essentially. So, you know, is there a tendency for sometimes the technology to become the idea?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We get a lot of kind of briefs that are just, you know, it's just the technology, it's just the idea. It's not really a story. You know, it's just kind of a gimmick commercial. And, you know, the ones like that spot that you showed, I mean, those are the better commercials. You know, really, it's, you know, and that's up to you guys to kind of feed us that script. And we don't, unfortunately, get to write those ourselves. So, you know, it's really, I think it's very easy for people to kind of watch some spot or get some reference and kind of hold on to that and think, oh, we want that spot, but with our logo on it. And that doesn't really help anyone.
It just ends up being, you know, pardon the phrase, like visual diarrhea. It's just tons of imagery, and it just doesn't match anything. It's just sort of a demo reel of, you know, what a studio is capable of, or, you know, what the kind of the director wants to do, but it's just sort of lost, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that, I mean, we all do this for a living, so we're like, you know, we're actively trying to talk people out of our jobs. So it's not, you know what I mean? I think should carry some weight in that, you know, we're talking about doing more stuff practically and doing kind of more story-driven effects and not effects-driven stories and stuff like that. I think that's an important message to kind of hear.
So that's interesting in that, you know, obviously you're not as excited by a very heavily VFX ad or film or whatever it may be if it doesn't have that emotional truth that you said. You'd rather have a great story with a sort of smaller amount of VFX than a sort of 60-second VFX extravaganza.
Well, yeah, I mean...
So you consider yourself storytellers as much as a creative or a director would, rather than kind of technologists, I suppose?
Absolutely.
Yes and no.
Okay. Good to have a bit of conflict.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, for me, I don't know. I think I work mainly in commercials, and you sort of learn very, very quickly that it isn't yours, you know, and that there are lots and lots of opinions involved in what you're doing. So for me personally, it is really just about trying to produce the best piece of work that you possibly can. It gets changed and watered down and filtered. You're very fortunate that you're able to create such a nice piece of work. But I imagine that probably changed somewhere along the line too, you know, in commercials. But you don't really own it, so I wish we could tell more of a story, but in commercials, I don't think we can really. I think you try, you always offer up the best possible thing that you think is correct and right, and then, you know, they'll say make it blue, and it's not the right thing to do, but you have to make it blue, you know. So that's what ends up happening.
I mean, that begs the question of how much power, if power is the right word, does a VFX artist or VFX supervisor have over a story? It sounds like kind of not very much, essentially.
No, well, I don't know. I'm sorry, it's a lot of it is a matter of trust. You know, if they trust you to do, you know, a decent job on whatever project it is, however complicated or simple it is, then I think that's part of the real power of what we do. They trust you to deliver it. They trust you to, you know, do that work. That shot from the other night, the stabilized thing that you did, that was just ridiculous. That was insane, you know. But they trust you to do it, and then you delivered it. You know. So
I mean, those are really the best scenarios. Is, you know, the times where we get good creative, it's shot well, it's directed well, and then the torch is kind of passed with the teamwork behind it to kind of take that to the finish line. You know, it's a bit of a disappointment when there are scenarios where it's like, we want that sky to be as, you know, or blue as possible, or make the product, you know, pop the product more, and it's like the blue is there's no more blue to give. It's as blue as it gets, you know. It's like you said, it's not always the right call, and it's not always the right way to go, but.
So what can be done, if anything, to increase that level of trust? I mean, you said that's a key word. I guess that's a key word in all the kind of relationships in the business.
It's all about collaboration. It's about having that. I mean, often what we see is that there can be a bit of a disconnect between, you know, the sort of, you know, the creators come up with an idea, then the director then turns it into their baby, then we have it, and, you know, everyone's got a tendency to sort of want to take the job and turn it into their own baby. But the best jobs is one where, you know, the agency's there all the time, and the director, and there's just this beautiful exchange of information. And the worst thing happens is then when people don't speak to each other. And we always like to show work often as soon as we can, and for it to go all the way up to the chain, because it's a collaborative effort. And well, it's either that, or you're allowed to sort of do a job where they say, right, do it, and we're going to let you do whatever you want. And I mean, we did that with Frank Budgeon with the Taylors, where we were just, he said, I've got an idea, you've just got to let me get on with it, and we just all locked ourselves away, and then came out and with something bizarre and spectacular.
So, Sherman, in your opinion, what's the most important relationship for a VFX? Is it the director? Is it important for you to have the director or the agency creatives, or is there no one person that kind of?
Yeah, I think it is a collaboration. It is a team effort, and I think if everyone's on the same page and they have that vision, the director's vision or the agency's vision, if everyone's on the same page and they want to push that creative and that look and that mood and that style, that works. But as soon as one of those pieces is missing, then that's where you get conflict. That's where things don't look as good as they can be. It's not as efficient. It takes too long. The budget skyrockets. So as long as those creatives are in the same room and they're hashing it out, they'll get a good product out of it.
Would you guys agree with that?
Being involved early, I think, with everyone, as you said. I mean, that's really the best work that we do comes from just being brought on at the beginning of a project, and it saves everyone money. It saves everyone so much money sometimes to just, no, we can do that bit in post and do this bit for real, and it's suddenly the budget's cut in half and it looks twice as good. So I mean, it's really important to not just kind of come hat in hand with a pile of stuff and say, yeah, can you fix this, please? It's like,
So does that? I mean, the term post-production, it seems essentially a redundant term now, because it feels like so many of your projects, and certainly the creative projects, you guys aren't kind of at the end of the process. You're there from the very beginning.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's very much so.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we get approached by the agency before the director's been found to say, we love what you did there. Can you do that again? And who do you recommend to direct? So I mean, the whole industry is turning upside down now, and which is quite exciting and quite scary. And I also, going back to the last point, I think it's as much just also being able to feel comfortable to say no to clients, to say, no, you can't have that. Because often people, I think their natural tendency is to say, can we have this, can we have this? And if you just say yes, yes, and yes, then if you allow them to dilute the job. And I think it's having courage of your convictions to say, look, we believe if we're going to do it and we're going to give you the best of what we can do, this is what we're going to do. And being prepared sometimes to say, no, we're not going to work like this, and walk away, and being uncompromising. And I think fewer creative directors and agencies and fewer directors are having that sort of no compromise. Like 10 years ago, you'd have big stand-up fights about, no, this is how we're going to do it. And I miss a bit of that, because I think it's very important that if you're going to do really outstanding work, you can't compromise all the time.
Okay.
I think it's a good point, actually, because I think if anyone was aspiring to be a VFX supervisor, I think the best advice I could give them was practice your skills of diplomacy more than anything, because it plays a huge, huge part in what we do, and you have to be a real diplomat in the suite sometimes to try and say no.
So
you're
trying to appease different
You definitely
parts
do.
of the
To go back to the point that Shervin was making earlier about who's the most important, is it the director, is it the agency? They're your clients, and you have to try to be the middleman and and calm everything down if it gets a bit out of hand, which it sometimes does.
I'm sure people can ask about that as well after the fact. And so the collaborative process and getting involved much earlier. I mean, is that the kind of old cliche of "don't worry, we can fix it in post"? Does that still apply? Do people still kind of come to you and thinking that pretty much anything can be done and fixed and made to look as exactly how they want to look, because you guys have got magic wands to do that? Is that, in your experience, is that?
It's hard for me, because sometimes I see it and it's just lazy filmmaking. Like, you could have just picked that boom and moved it, and now we have to paint it out, and we're going to charge you this much money.
But don't you find the opposite happens sometimes as well?
Yeah.
Where the shoot stops and they go to such extraordinary lengths to change something, and you think, I could have painted that out in 2 minutes.
It doesn't matter at all. Yeah.
You can't win.
You can't win, no.
No, I mean that's why we need to be on set. I think that's the key for me. That having kind of a post guy, a visual effects supervisor, there on set with you and listening to what we have to say. Not just there is kind of procedure or protocol, but there in a collaborative fashion to really kind of direct that shoot. There's times where we'll be filming, like we filmed a soccer advert, and it's, we just got the green and they're doing the whole stadium and everything behind, and it's like, let's tilt the camera up a little bit. And it's a, you know, the director's reaming me out because it's like trying to show my show, and there's going to be a giant stadium and all the production value in the world up here, and there's a rubbish pitch of grass down here. I'm just trying to help out, you know, but it's, you know, so it's having that collaboration a little bit and kind of just being able to work as a team to make the best product. You know, we're there to help. We're not there to try and steal someone's thunder.
Yeah,
and,
right.
you know.
I think another interesting thing about the fix it and post comment has to do with technology being so advanced. Like if you think back before, like a lot of people would shoot on 35 millimeter film, and you have to do the take, and every time you turn on that camera, there's money rolling through the camera. Now with all these digital cameras, you just flick it on, oh, I don't like it, turn it off, you know. You have all this more, you know, no one's held accountable. You know, you can just, the director can say, well, I can change it later, I can change the idea later, I don't need to do this, I can do it in post. And I find it's kind of bothersome, you know, a little bit. Like I love that there's a prosthetic in that piece. That's, you know, so amazing to see that someone went through the time to build it, and you know, you can get different takes and angles and lights. Where now these days it's like we'll just do it all CG and we'll figure out how it looks later.
Yeah,
So
and the
it's nice
design is
it's
like
set,
locked down beforehand,
Yeah.
and you know, like it's a really great job to show because it really shows a process kind of how it should be and not how a lot of the times it is. You know, it's everyone wants to just make the decision as late as possible and just push the decision to as late as possible instead of just being decisive and committing to an idea.
I wanted to touch as well on the phrase you mentioned, Paul, the uncanny valley. So how, I mean, it's a phrase I've heard before, and maybe a few people here have, and don't necessarily fully understand it, but as far as I can tell, it's essentially when something kind of looks real but doesn't. And how difficult is it to avoid that, or how often do people fall into the trap of...
Well, it's really, really difficult to avoid. I mean, I think the first people to really climb out of the valley was Digital Domain on Benjamin Button. I thought there was some standout work there, and then bizarrely enough, the year after he did Tron.
Not so much.
And not so much. So it's really it's very hard, and we were consistently sort of fighting that on this, where some of the lower shots of Simon, you were sort of looking up, and it just looked wrong, and we had to remodel him, and there was a huge amount of remodeling on each shot just to sort of make it work, and. So it's something, I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done on that. I mean, we sort of squashed it with brute force and modelling and painting whenever we had to on this job. But, you know, I mean, the one thing we learned to do, sort of the very first thing we learned to do is identify our mother and father's faces, and identifying faces and reading a face is something which is probably the most intrinsic, you know, sort of skill we have. So that's going to be a challenge, but you know, give it 5 years. You know, 5 years we'll just be knocking it out. And look at games. I mean, you know, our industry sort of was pulling so much from feature film for so many years, and then the skin shader we used on Simon came from games. It was an algorithm developed by NVIDIA for real-time game performance. So we're seeing now so much. You know, there's more money in the games industry than the feature film business now. So. You know, that technology is beginning to shift, and so there's very interesting ramifications to that.
And is that the uncanny valley is essentially an artistic issue more than a technological one? I mean, it sounds like...
Perceptive.
Right, okay, so you can just tell intuitively that it doesn't look right. It's not like you can kind of check an algorithm and go, well, let's just fix this.
Yeah. No, the technology wasn't always there, but it is now to where, you know, if it's wrong, it's our fault. It's not the technology's fault.
Right. What else have we got on here? So, what are the hardest projects that you've ever worked on? What's the most difficult thing? I mean, you talked before about how the evolution of technology, you know, it's leaps and bounds. And you know, I guess 10 years ago, people were saying water and fur and stuff like that was quite difficult. What now is the kind of hardest thing to work on? I mean, skin tone, I guess you said one of them. Is that? That's
one. Crowds is a new big thing. We're going to see a lot of crowds coming online soon because there's been some very good developments in, you know, crowds, and you know, it's like in World Wars. I mean, anything that you see in a feature film, generally, sort of, you know, give it a couple of years, and we'll see that sort of exploited in sort of, you know, much quicker turnaround work. So I think crowds is definitely one. Behavior, artificial intelligence, we're seeing is getting emergent behaviors from lots of different people. there's been some very interesting things with that, I think.
I guess that's the same across the board, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that and really the combination of kind of intense design work with visual effects. You know, I think there are a lot more spots now that kind of tread the line between, you know, what used to be just kind of design-centric spots and what are now kind of VFX-heavy spots. So there's a lot more control expected over the effects that we're creating. So it's not just making an explosion, it's making an explosion that forms 0%. Or, you know, making it, you know, so it's controlling the effects that we've already kind of been generating for a while in new and creative ways as well.
But then it's also matching as well. Certain things come out and they really push, you know, the sort of envelope, and you have to then match it with, you know, if someone suddenly does I think the Mill have done a fantastic orangutan job, which looks fantastic for a commercial. It's extraordinary. And now suddenly, if anybody else, you know, wants an orangutan in their ad, they'll go, oh, it has to be like that.
Yeah.
You know, so then suddenly right, okay, so we need to get to that
So
mark and get to that.
That's what pushes those boundaries and makes everyone.
Yeah, it does really. Yeah, I think
But
so.
they'll want that done in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like the deadlines get shorter and shorter.
With no budget.
With no budget, and they, you know, they
And
want more shots of that orangutan.
Yeah.
Every time you deliver.
Yeah.
And we just keep delivering and delivering,
Yeah.
and then it's 1 week with half the money again.
Yeah.
That's the big
Not
challenge.
to sound bitter or anything.
No, not at all. What?
Well, I heard this happened in LA where Steven Spielberg, when he made the War of the Worlds, this is the one film everybody blames because I think ILM took it on and they had a 3-month turnaround, sort of, and on a feature film with that many effects, you know, which is that broad and that deep, it's just insane. But somehow ILM managed to just put everybody on it and they turned around. So then every other studio now thinks, oh, you only need 3 months to post a huge film like that. And that happens. And but that comes down to education. I mean, it always makes me cry when, you know, you have this most beautiful, you can spot it a mile off. You get a script and you think, that's going to win an award. You can spot them, you know, sort of coming over the horizon. And then they say, well, we've already got three weeks to post it or 2 weeks to post it. And you know, that's the thing which really makes me upset, is when you have beautiful ideas and it's just, you know, it's been in development for a year. Yeah. Why have you only waited for the last 3 weeks to come to us?
Well, it's an interesting note about.
Oh, absolutely.
It's an interesting note about War of the Worlds because from the outside it looks like it took 3 months, but Dennis Muren did tons of pre-production planning to be able to do it in 3 months. They had already sketched out the robot designs. ILM had already started doing the work before they even started principal photography. So that goes back to our point about involving creatives early and getting directors involved with the visual effects supervisors and the team so that they can hash out those things very early, so when they go to film to shoot, they can do something in 3 months. You know, that works in that case, but when you come on later at the end and ask to do that in 3 months, then it's, you know, that's a disaster.
So I'm conscious of the time, so I want to open up some questions to the audience and to the people on the live stream, if possible. So has anyone in the audience got a question for any of the guys? Anyone? Anyone? There's a question. Good. Well done, man.
I remember a while back.
Oh, there's a microphone coming if you want to. Just.
So, like a few years back, hair and fur, I think, was an issue. And I'm sure before that there were other things that you guys couldn't do, but now you can. Like looking at what I've seen today, it's pretty much flawless. Is there anything that you haven't cracked yet? Like, what's the one thing that still can't be done?
I think, well, water is still on the cusp. I mean, you know, everybody says, oh, we can do water now, but I still don't really feel, you know, it's very rarely flawlessly produced. And when it is, it takes a huge amount of time. And we're doing a 14th century fleet invading sort of this, you know, Italy at the moment. And I just get all the oars and water is really, I still feel, you know, there's a lot of simple water simulations, but when you start wanting to have water interacting with air, because when you have spray in it, you know, we've got one guy who's been sort of doing rolling waves, and when you put air into the equation, it sort of like quadruples the simulation time, and then you get beautiful results. So I think a lot of the physical phenomena, there's still some way to go, and yes, I'd say that's one.
Yeah, I mean, CG fire too
Fire,
is
yeah.
another. I mean, we do
It's
a
a
ton of
tough one.
fire work, and it looks good, but it could look better.
Yeah.
We always try to film as much as we can practically and then augment it instead
Yeah.
of just kind of doing the whole thing in CG, which sometimes you have to do. So I think the physical phenomenon, like you said, I think are the biggest.
Yeah.
So is it the fluidity of those things that cause the problem? What is it about those things that make it that difficult?
It goes back to what Paul was saying earlier about the uncanny valley. There's something about it because it is something that you know how it is supposed to look, and you know how it's supposed to behave. It's a subconscious thing, and as soon as you watch it and it isn't quite right, your brain just says that's something wrong with that, And they seem like, I guess, not simple things, but it's like a sea of water. It's like, okay, must be able to do that. Or fire.
Yeah.
It's dancing around, it's moving around, but it's just very, very difficult and tricky to get it absolutely nailed.
It's also it's one of the scenarios where we don't have kind of interactivity yet. And I think that really, being able to do those revisions quickly really benefits us in a lot of other areas. So
Sorry, how do you mean by you don't have interactivity?
So to simulate fire, it's typically like a 4 to 6 hour turnaround when you make changes, as opposed to a 6-second turnaround.
Right,
so
right.
you get 10 rounds of revisions over the course of a week on that fire, as opposed to over the course of a day. And that's where I was talking about earlier that as technology pushes forward, those fire simulations, those water simulations, all that stuff will get much faster, and the results will be much better.
Okay.
Yeah, it's iterations, isn't it? The
It's
more times you do
absolutely.
something, the better it gets.
Right,
And,
okay. Practice makes perfect sort of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Does anyone? Yeah.
Sorry. I was asking the same question actually, like a couple of months ago, I think in June, there was another VFX summit, and big studios was concerned about how the business moving along in the industry. And now I think Paul is more closest to this question. But I know Super is, they're not interacting directly in the business side, but they are indirectly in there. And how they see there in the future industry is the model is working still like bidding and doing modeling again many times, who's paying for that, and how you keep your artists still happy with these long hours.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm also an owner, so I've sort of one foot in both bits, I guess. It's hard. I mean, it's about finding the right partners to work with. I mean, we work with really reasonable people, and every now and then you get somebody who's. I don't think many people are actually that unreasonable. It's just that they just don't really know what they're asking. So I mean, usually you're. But it's also we feel it's our responsibility to let people know and for us to identify. Look, if we're going to do this project and you've got this amount of, you've got this budget, then the process is going to be like this. We're going to, here's a schedule. We need to have lock-off points for different points, and we need to do our previs, and we need to get it locked off then. And if we don't lock that off, then there's going to have a whole follow-on effect. It's tough. There's no doubt about it. It's tough. We've got a sort of capex heavy business, and the people is very heavy. The machine time is actually the cheap thing nowadays, and and budgets are going down and down, and so there's no doubt about it. It's more competitive now than ever, but I also think it's more exciting now than ever too. So it's relationships. I mean, you probably.
Yeah, is the question specifically about having to work long hours on a job, or?
No, actually, how the business model is working now in the VFX industry. You bid fixed budget, and then.
Oh, I see, and then it changes effectively.
Changes along the way.
Yeah.
And then how you keep this relationship with your clients.
Yeah, it is very, very tricky. It's very, very difficult. But I'm a smaller company than Paul's. I was a very large company, and only last year went alone with two friends, and we've got a small studio in London now, and just a handful of us. And for us, I guess, we know what our bottom line is. We know what we have to do in order to keep everybody employed. And so when a job comes in, unfortunately, particularly in advertising, once again, people tend to just have a pot of money, and they say, this is it, this is what we've got. And as Paul says, you then go through the process of, you try to tell them what they can have for that money, but invariably what happens is they'll come back and say, oh, we didn't want, those dancing elephants on fire. We do now. So you then say, okay, well, we're trying, you end up trying to work stuff out, really, and it changes, and it's a real balancing act, because you don't want to lose customers, you don't want to lose clients, but then of course you don't want to go out of business. So you do have to. The earlier you can agree to stuff, the better. But I've been doing this for 20 odd years, and it's always been the same. Stuff always changes. It doesn't matter how many times you say, this is how it's got to be. It always changes. Stuff always comes up on shoots. Stuff always goes wrong. And you said about fix it in post earlier. I would have just said yes to that question. It's still true. It still happens. It doesn't change.
I mean, and that's the thing. It's like everyone acts like it's a new problem, that budgets are low. I mean, budgets have always been going down. It's really just about working smarter, I think, more than anything for me. It's like, the democratization of all of the technology that we use, and how much cheaper it is now to, pop into, a program like Nuke or something, and just, you can find artists that are straight out of college that are doing just as good, if not better, work than the guys that have been doing it for 10 or 15 years. And it's, so it's that sort of stuff. It's just being smarter about your crew, smarter about the tools that you're using, working harder, working faster, because, the agency budgets are down too, and they're expected to do just as much more than they were too. I mean, so it's, everyone's kind of lower and lower and lower, and expecting more and more and more. And it's not just our industry. I mean, the car that I can get for 30 grand now is a lot better than the car.
There must come a point though where you have to kind of put,
you do.
There's only so much that you can do for the money.
You definitely do. But I think your point is absolutely right. When people had £1 million to make a commercial, they wanted you to do £2 million worth of work.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason why I asked about working hours, etc., was, I think that what we do is, I think a lot of it is, I've always said that post-production, a lot of it is based on goodwill. You have people who really want to produce really good work, and they are prepared to put in the extra time and extra effort to do that good work. And I think that it's what is really important is for guys like us who are heading these studios, is to make sure that we treat our staff correctly in terms of, you've got to give some people time off at the end of a project. They work very hard. You have to, make them feel like that they're part of the team, and you're all in it together. And I think if you can do that, if you can make, as we were talking about earlier, a sort of collaborative environment, then you will get more done. Because I can't see, other than trying to find, sort of cheaper ways of doing things, which aren't always the best way to do it. I don't know of another way to get the results that everybody's expecting for less.
But it is. I know for the feature film side, it is broken. The feature film work is not working. A great example is Life of Pi. Won Oscar, and the company that did it went bankrupt immediately after. And that is a group of artists, a group of creatives, a group of technology that is no longer in the business, or not as strong as it would be. So if you went and wanted to get Tigers and all that amazing work they did, where are you gonna go?
Was that as a direct result of the work they did on the film, or was that a
It was just a compound problem. The problem with feature film side is we have 7 clients. We have 7 studios and everyone's bidding, on it and trying to do it for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And as a filmmaker, it's the difference of getting my film made or not. So if this company's, charging this amount of dollars, well, I might have to go to this one because I'll get my film done and I'll pay less, and it'll happen. So it's this kind of bizarre thing that's happening right now. And on the feature side, it's not going that well.
It's a race to the bottom in features. We could spend the next hour talking about that, and it'll be not a very happy chat. I mean, the feature film business is now run by governments putting big tax breaks there. I mean, it seems to be pretty dead in California. Everybody's going up to Canada and shooting in Montreal, and British Columbia, and it's, you know, well, we could talk about economics and free market capitalist societies and why capitalism's gone wrong, but coming back onto, so I mean, it's tough, you know, that's beginning to happen a bit, you know, I mean, agencies are, you know, got a lot of power, and they often want to go for some of the bigger sort of, you know, factory-like places to sort of, you know, because they've got deals, retrospective deals, so I mean, you know, there's lots of economic factors at play, and but as you say, like small studios, we can't afford to burn through our staff. I mean, we did a job for one of the very big places recently, a feature film, and they asked us to put our staff on 7-day weeks for 3 months, and I said, look, I can't afford to do that. I can't burn through my entire sort of staff because they're never going to want to come back. But they routinely do, because they've just got thousands of people who work for them, and they can just burn. So yeah, the business is, in that side, in the features especially, really tough, and you know, the effects seem as quite fungible. I think in commercials it's much more sort of you know, territorially sort of, you know, it's much harder because a quicker turnaround. So you know, with features the work is much longer, so you know, the work is more fungible. You can get all your production design and then send it off. I mean, we're competing with people in Tibet at the moment. You know, we're competing with people in Tibet and in Mexico for a job shot in Wales. So I mean, it's gone pretty crazy, sort of in the long form business. But I think commercials is much more protected because people want to be, you know, the agencies want to obviously just pop into your studio in Soho and sit down with you and talk with you, and you know, but yeah, maybe later for drinks. Yeah.
Okay, so again, I'm conscious of time. Does anyone have any questions before? Or one more? Yeah, have we got time for one more? I think we have.
Yeah, we've got time for one more.
Okay.
You mentioned about diplomacy, and often producers are on the front line when it comes to diplomacy.
Yes.
You also mentioned the fix it in post attitude, and what do you think producers can do to be a bit more active on set and try and get a bit more knowledge, to speak more confidently to people that have no idea what they're buying or talking about, so that they feel better about it and they can minimise the amount of fix in post instances that happen?
Agency producers or VFX producers?
VFX producers.
VFX producers.
Or both.
Yeah, I mean, from the VFX producing side, it's really just about making you guys more aware of kind of the...
I'm not a producer.
Making you producers out there aware of really just the ramifications of your choices. I mean, a lot of the times, you know, like everyone said, it's, oh, well, we'll ask for some, you know, different effect or just a little change, and it seems like such a menial little change, but really, you know, going off that previs or unlocking that animation, and it can have detrimental to, you know, effects to kind of the whole process. So just really speaking more, I mean, talking more, collaborating more, and the same on the agency side, you know, just having a VFX producer and a, you know, VFX supervisor there to really answer those questions, and then trusting them and kind of believing what they say. You know, a lot of the agency producers get a lot of pushback. Oh, it can't be that hard, and I can just, you know, and if we're telling you that it's hard, it's not. We're not trying to trick you most of the time. You know, it really does have a lot of impact. So.
I think there's, I always tend to think that there's, especially in post-production, there tends to be sort of two breeds of post-production producer. Certainly in commercials, you get the one type of producer who's very good with clients, very good at entertaining, pretty good at getting work in, but not so great at line producing, the day-to-day running of the job. And then you get the opposite, where you've got someone who is, you know, very good technically, very good at running the job, very good at line producing, but then doesn't really want to go out boozing every night with agency producers. And I just think you need a good mixture of both, and don't be afraid to be one or the other, and certainly keep the first lot away from the set, because it will just be a disaster. That's my own personal experience.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
No,
I think that's the thing, is often people, if they're, you know, the most, you know, a little bit of knowledge, no knowledge at all is okay, but a little bit of knowledge can be more dangerous than, you know, no
Absolutely.
knowledge. And especially people feel a bit sort of, you know, prickly, and they don't want to say, so they'll just say, no, we can do that, I've done it before, and they don't really know. And I think the people we like to work with the most are the people who say, that's a good question, I don't know, tell me about it, and want to engage in a dialogue, and that requires trust. You know, they must be, you know, they've got to sort of trust the people who they're asking the questions, what are the ramifications of that? And I think the big thing anyway is learn about, you know, I mean, if somebody has to work with visual effects, is learn more about visual effects. If you're going to have a house built, you're probably going to do a fair bit of research on, you know, what kind of walls you want and how deep should your foundation be. And if you're spending, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds on visual effects, go onto the sites, look at the making of us, and say, can I sit in your studio for a couple of hours, or can you show me around and show me the process? Because no one asks that, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
You know, why don't they want to see how we do it?
That's the biggest thing, is just education. You know, it's educating the client, it's the producer having that education. And it's not like learning how to use the program or being an expert at it, but just seeing how it's done. Like something like this, you know, a lot of people just see the finished piece and say, I want that, and I want that in 2 weeks. But when you see how much work is involved and how much artistry is involved, and, you know, just the details, you kind of get a good idea, a good education of what it takes to build a piece. And then you can kind of transfer that onto the clients and, you know, let them know what it takes, and it empowers you to have that knowledge behind you.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll probably have to start wrapping up there. I just want to say thanks to Ludo, to Grant, to Paul, and to Shervin. Thank you guys for coming. Hang around. We've got more drinks next door, I think. If you want to ask the guys any particular questions about, I don't know, the death of feature filmmaking, then please feel free to do so. But thanks, guys. Thanks very much. It's very interesting and very useful and helpful. Thank you.